introduce our speakers tonight. We have Blake Norton and Tracy Tanner. They're family therapists. They co-own a group practice, and between the two of them, they have 4 boys. And they're best friends too, apparently. So that's pretty cool. They've been working with teens and families since 2009, and they started Girl Talk therapy groups in 2012. 11, excuse me, and GT therapy in 2016. And at GT, Blake and Tracy direct a team of 10 therapists who serve all different ages and stages, from family systems, attachment focus, interpersonal neurobiology rooted lens. That's a fun one to say. They offer group therapy for tweens and teens and remain convinced that adolescence is a magical time of growth and transformation for teens and parents alike. I like that. So without further ado, let's talk about some interrelational neuroscience and getting connected and better communication with our teens. How do we achieve this? How do we achieve this unicorn relationship?
We're going to try to pack a lot of information into a fairly short amount of time. So it's going to be us probably going kind of fast over some talking points and bullets that cover a few different arenas related to the brain and the nervous system and communication and connection with your teen. And in between kind of each section, we're going to pause and do a little reflection where you have a chance to think about and integrate some of what we're talking about into your own experience. And you can use the chat to send us questions, to share comments. We probably won't have time to dig deep into specific situations, so we might have to stay a little bit bigger picture here. But if there are things that come up that are sort of triggering some questions for you that you want to go deeper in, our contact information is in that link that Rachel has shared or will share, and you can reach out to us, and we're happy to set up time to talk in depth too. So Tracy, I'll let you start with the first reflection, getting people thinking about.
Well, we're here to talk about adolescence and the brain. And I think we all know that adolescence, there's this like societal sort of like, ooh, there's that big inhale, there's that pause. When you tell someone that you've got a teen, maybe there's that look of like empathy and understanding. Yeah. It's a hard time for sure. And, we remain committed to the idea of reframing some of the ideas around adolescence, because it's our own reflection that gets us through what is a hard time. And so we think about adolescence and want to dispel the myths that get us stuck in feeling that it is so hard and so difficult. For a little moment here, we want you to drop in the chat or just think on your own about like, how would you describe adolescence in a couple words, one word or a phrase? What are the words that you would use to describe that time period, teenage? And we'll also make sure that things get posted in the chat about visuals. There we go. Awesome. We've got social. I knew Moody was going to come up.
Yeah.
Hormonal. Unpredictable. I'm ready for the teenage angst to pop up.
Emotional.
Absolutely. Thank you for everyone for sharing.
Painful.
Yeah. And you know what? A lot of this also comes up from our own experiences, tracing back to our own memories, walking in our minds through middle school halls, high school halls, and feeling the difficulty of it. And I think that's what makes parenting exceptionally hard, is that we have our own stuff from adolescence that we carry with us into our children's journey. And we, as parents, are always wanting to do better and prevent anything that we possibly can that maybe happened to us in our growing up stages for our own children. And we hope that the information that we have today about the brain will give you some insight too into restructuring some of the myths that we hold about teenage years, that it's purely emotional, hormonal turmoil.
So everybody's probably coming in with a different level of knowledge already about what's going on in the teenage brain. Some of you may have read a lot of books, listened to some of the podcasts. Some of you may be super familiar with some of what we're going to share. So we'll try to kind of briefly go over some of the nuts and bolts of the teen brain, but some of you may not be familiar with it at all. So we do want to take a few minutes to kind of break down some of what's happening structurally in the adolescent brain. But part of this reframe that we want to hold out for you guys is to be thinking about what's happening in the teenage brain during these remodeling years as a time of possibility and promise, not just the things that feel painful, unpredictable, and hard, but that there's really a lot of rich development going on during this time. Do you want to talk about the parts of the brain?
Yeah, and hopefully instilling a sense of like agency, a sense of like that there is possibility in the parenting of an adolescent, albeit it's sandwiched around times that do feel quite difficult. So I love what Blake said about the remodeling, because I think that's a great metaphor for understanding what is really happening in the teenage brain and being able to understand those moments where you feel like your child is in a moment where they've got it. Oh, yes, I can send my kid to college and I think we're going to make it through. And then maybe like 20 minutes later, there's some sort of emotional breakdown, and it's it's unnerving to understand like what happened to that kid that I saw this morning that went to school or whatnot. It's the remodeling, it's a restructuring. So if we use the metaphor of like a house remodel, we know that not all things can be done at the same time. If you're going to remodel the kitchen, install new appliances, maybe change out the pipes because some of them like are old and we need to upgrade and update. What do you have to do first? You got to turn off the water. And so that's the same thing that goes on in the teenage brain, is that under construction, there are some areas of the brain that turn off, kind of shut down, while other areas of the brain are powering up. In early childhood development, there's a great sense of like neuroplasticity, and that's the brain's ability to change quickly, absorb lots of information. And in early childhood, it's a generalized information. It's sort of like setting the landscape and growing the trees and the forest of the mind. But then in adolescence, pruning begins to happen. And pruning is when the information that has come in, the new knowledge is really getting selected and like trimmed up.
It's a time of essentially where you're learning how to specialize. And so in that generalized learning of early childhood, then you're moving into this phase of adolescence where you're going to highlight certain things that you're learning about, but you're going to let other things go. And so that means that your brain is essentially pruning away some of the underutilized or less needed neural connections to make room for that specialization. We should probably talk about just the actual structure of the brain. You probably have heard different language to talk about it. So the triune brain, the human, thank you. The primate or human, mammal, reptile, or lizard brain. There's different ways of talking about it. Dan Siegel talks a lot about the upstairs, downstairs brain, and sort of sandwiches in the lower and middle brain into that downstairs part. But quite simply, the most advanced part of our brain is the neocortex, the human or primate brain that's responsible for regulating emotions, higher level thinking, complex problem solving, goal setting. It's executive functioning, which anyone who has a child who has ADHD or who is 2E would know a lot about executive functioning. All of those skills are really developed in this frontal lobes. And that's the part of the brain that's the last to fully develop. And so our teenagers certainly have access to this higher level thinking brain, but inconsistently and not in they're not developing that in a uniformly linear fashion. So sometimes they're going to be able to demonstrate some super high level complex thinking and judgment and problem solving, and other times they're really not. That mid-level brain is really kind of the emotional brain. It's the center where our emotions are derived. And then our upstairs brain, or that human brain, is what regulates those emotions. And then the downstairs, the bottom part of that brain, the brain stem, the reptile brain, whatever language you want to use to describe it, is the most primitive. And it's essentially responsible for our basic functioning, the way that our body functions, our breathing and our heart rate and things that are necessary for life. And it's the source of our fight, flight, freeze response. So it's where our nervous system is in intimate communication with this most primitive part of our brain. Okay, there's a lot more I could say about that, but Tracy, you jump in.
That was, thanks for jumping in. So as Blake said and shared a little bit more about pruning, so that's like one of the big differences between early childhood brain development and teenage brain development. And then the second important difference is something called myelination, which is happening. And myelination is what helps processes and synapses in our brains move quickly and efficiently. And it becomes, that process is what helps quick thinking to happen. And so that part of the brain is also rapidly developing during this time.
The other thing I want to mention about brain development and how it's not linear or consistent is that it also is impacted by other factors like neurodivergence, like environmental experiences, so chronic stressors, COVID, living through this kind of an experience, having trauma in your life, having medical illness, all of these things impact how the brain is developing, and also how a teen is able to access some of their higher level thinking skills and brain functioning at different times. So it's also contingent on how many stressors have accumulated over a lifetime, as well as what is happening right now in this moment.
And it's really important to honor those times that we're not in the neocortex, human primate brain, that it is important to be able to be in our emotional state, that we learn and get a lot of information from that place of being. And the expectation that we sort of approach all things in that higher level thinking puts a lot of stress and a lot of demand on kids. And if we think about it, the school day is where teens are spending most of their time sort of pushed in that direction, pushed into higher level thinking. So a lot of parents might be experienced, like when they get their kid home, there's this great sort of like meltdown.
The post-restraint collapse.
Yeah.
Yes, where they might fall apart or shut down. They don't want to talk to you about how their day was.
Sort of like the worst comes out. And that's because like they're all day, the brain has been taxed by pushing them in that direction, to think critically and to use all those executive functioning skills. And so that creates a lot of stress and demand on parents too, to be able to sort of hold that space for kids, that they come back home from school, from their activities, and having to sort of help them through that time when they're not in their best selves.
I like that you talked about too the value of the emotional brain, that we kind of sometimes talk about that as if that's a lower functioning, less important, less relevant part of the brain, but it's actually the way that these parts of our brain get integrated that is most important. We want them communicating. We don't want to silo the emotional brain or treat it like it's less than or somehow unimportant in development. We really want to honor that part of our brain is communicating something important that our cognitive higher level thinking skills need in order to make sound decision making. We actually have to be in touch with that part of our brain too.
And I may be kind of skipping ahead, but this really does seem like the perfect time to bring in the bit about self-awareness, which is a key component to helping teens to function fully. And that is like, it's this integrated part where the higher level brain and the emotional limbic center need to be able to communicate with each other. Self-awareness is that ability to go inwards and check in with the, how am I doing? What are my needs? You know, that sort of like, what is my sensory, physical experience even? And so the part where Blake was just saying, that the emotional center of the brain is really good information, we have to be able to help our teens create a good highway between the upper and middle parts of our brain.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk about this more a little bit later, but a lot of what interpersonal neurobiology is really about is the way that our brains, bodies, nervous systems communicate both within ourselves and in relationship with others. And this is going to be super key because a lot of what Tracy's talking about, that developing self-awareness, is something that teens learn in part by watching us practice that, the ability to tune into our own physiological and emotional states, us to be able to notice our own cues about what's happening in my body, what's happening in my emotions, what's happening in my thought processes, and to be able to watch us kind of make sense of what's happening in our own experience, particularly under stress. So, and this doesn't mean we have to get it right every time. It's not about like, oh, I need to be able to self-regulate perfectly anytime I'm under stress in order to teach my teen. It's in fact when we kind of mess up and then repair it and show our teens our resilience and ability to regulate after, say, losing it, that's much more helpful modeling for them. So, but we'll jump in more to that in a little bit. Okay.
Well, I think like a moment for like a little reflection. I love this question because it's going to get you thinking about your big wishes and big desires. So, and I'm a magic person. So if you had a genie grant you one wish for your teen and their development or life, what would you ask for? Go ahead and share it in the chat if you want to, but I want you to take this moment to sort of like, this helps us to center in. Like, what are what's one of the big things for me and my desires for my teen and in my relationship with my teen and in my parenting of my teen? That reflection gives you a lot of information and also acts as an anchor. Because as parents, we can't do it all the time. And sometimes we just need to focus and hone in on the one or two things that in this moment, in this time, or in this stage, or in this week, like this is the thing that I really want to focus on and work on to do well. I love this, the balance act of life, and in confidence. I love that. I think having those key reminders of like sort of the bigger picture helps us also to be able to identify as a parent moments that we can connect with our teen, moments that we might be able to enter their lives in an effective way. And get us to also sort of back off from other things that can be distracting towards our like primary goal for them, with them.
Yeah, confidence is coming up a lot. Self-advocacy.
Cause and effect.
Cause and effect.
This is a perfect segue to risk taking.
Yes, it is.
I mean, really, we should take that.
So this is one of the things that teens are, of course, known for. This is something that I think they can be maligned for, is their risk taking, because it often has some pretty serious consequences. And it's something that we do have to be aware of in how we address parenting, teaching, or just being in relationships with teens, is that they are inherently, for the most part, these are generalizations, right? But what's happening in the brain is we are in adolescence, we are overvaluing the rewards of taking risks, and we are undervaluing the risks. And there's some evolutionary purpose behind that, because one of the things that we're really preparing for in adolescence is
some of the biggest risks of our lives.
some of the biggest ones. And one of the big ones that I know parents think about a lot is launching. At some point they're supposed to be able to leave us and we want them to be able to leave us well. And that's really scary. And it's also why being able to take risks is absolutely necessary for their development. And a part of the challenge as a parent, as a therapist, as a teacher of young people is how to help them have enough structure and stability that they can take risks that aren't overwhelmingly risky. And that's not always possible for us to manage ahead of time. Sometimes we have to pull back and, maybe they've gone a little bit too far in risk taking and we have to help them kind of step back from the ledge a little bit. But it's really tough, I think, for parents to know. And we're kind of always doing a dance, like, where is this line? Because it's not a bright line that exists anywhere. It's an ever evolving process of dialogue really with our teens about what they're emotionally, physically, spiritually, academically ready for, and what they might need us to help provide a little bit more scaffolding for.
And it's without the risk taking, then we are also left without an ability to learn resilience, to learn compassion through failure, to learn, grit and determination. We've got to be able to sort of put ourselves into waters that are uncomfortable and mildly scary in order to have the experiences that would help give us that kind of feedback.
Some of what this looks like means kind of allowing for and supporting situations in which your teen is putting themselves out there, maybe socially, or maybe by taking on a challenge that you might know, oh, this is probably not going to go well, but it's actually a failure.
Oh, 5 AP Chat classes? Oh, yeah.
But then there's also, right, that's actually a good example because I think that's one that can kind of go either way, right? Sometimes that might actually end up being for the teen who is maybe prone to experiencing academic overwhelm, anxiety, who might be nurturing some perfectionist tendencies, for them, taking that one extra super challenging class might be the thing that's actually overwhelmingly difficult. Not difficult in a way that's supporting their growth and resilience. And so this is super, it's just different for every teen and every set of circumstances. And there is kind of the optimal stress bell curve. Some of you may have seen the visual out there for that, where there's like we need a little bit of stress. It's motivating. It helps us stay interested and engaged, and it's promoting learning. But too much stress and we either fall into withdrawal and shutdown and collapse, or emotional overwhelm. And the teen that you might see that's really highly emotive or acting out behaviorally, and both of those extremes are indicators that there's too much stress. We have to figure out a way to help get them back into whatever their optimal zone is, which is, again, different for every teenager, but also different at any given time based on what else is going on in their physiology, what else is going on in their lives, in their relationships, and in their world.
So at this point, you might be thinking, so yeah, this sounds completely nuanced and incredibly difficult. And I think, one of the things that we're hoping to not only share with you information in this presentation is also to help enforce the periods where, as a parent, the reflection, the sort of like quiet zones to find yourself in as a parent, finding yourself in relationships in which you can verbally process, in which you can get sounding boards that are helpful for you to be looking at and thinking about all these different nuanced situations. That's super important. And with that, we just get into another sort of reflective moment. So we kind of went big picture with Jeannie, wish, if you could give sort of your teen one great thing in life. But what are some of the life skills that you would desire for your teen to have that would help them in life? life skills. And I think go big or go small, because there's nothing wrong with just like, can you learn to put the dishes away? That's fine. I think that's an important life skill that we shouldn't miss. But I'm really curious to hear, like, what are some of the things that just feel important? Self-discipline and delayed gratification.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Time management and organization. I think as adults, like we could all feel like it. Yes, like these
Uh-huh.
are key things that are so important to us.
Mhm. These first examples too, you guys may already know this, are also really good examples of those executive functioning, higher level
Yeah.
cognitive processes skills that they might be able to do sometimes to some extent, sometimes maybe really well, other times maybe not at all. Again, varies by teen, but that part of the brain is not fully developed until, mid to late 20s. And so a lot of these skills that we want for them, it's like, oh gosh, I have to delay my own gratification and waiting to see this come to fruition. We're laying a lot of groundwork right now, but we're not going to see the payoff for a while.
It's true. I really like
Public
public
speaking.
speaking. I actually think that is a really valuable life skill.
Yeah.
And as we can attest to a little bit right now, it's not always easy. I really, really love these. And knowledge that perspective and truth are different.
Mm,
They're such big things.
mm,
And I don't know. I'm also getting this sense too of like, it's always important as an adult to pause and realize that the growth just like keeps going. It keeps continuing. We know now, like of adolescence, this period of time really extends until mid 20s, even sometimes like late 20s. But after that, there's still a whole lot of life that keeps on going. I love humility, empathy, and integrity. It's the importance of your word and being honest. A lot of times we don't even learn these things unless we learn it through experiences of some hard failure,
mhm,
which can
mhm,
be hard on all around, all
mhm,
accounts.
mhm. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and go into talking about the emotionality of adolescence. And
Because moody came up.
yes,
These teens be moody. Oh God, I hope not.
just speaking to some
Just speaking.
fears
There
here.
you go.
So like we talked about, the part of the brain that is at kind of the source of our emotions, the limbic system, that midbrain, is really, it's in high gear in adolescence. Part of what it's also doing, that there have been some really interesting studies on how teens read and interpret emotion. They tend to overemphasize negative emotion, over interpret negative emotion. You might notice this. I don't know if you have teens like this, but you might have heard them say, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Or "Why did you say it like that?" Because they're really hyper attuned to perceiving potential negative emotion in others. They're also developing much more of that social and relational awareness. "Why are you yelling at me?" Exactly. I'm like, I was just talking in my normal voice. Yes. And to them though, I think this is really helpful to remember, if you can, when you go back to it in those moments. It can be really frustrating and enraging even, and it can also be disappointing as the parent to be on the receiving end of that misinterpretation. Like, no, I'm not doing this to you. Perspective versus truth, right? But here's the thing, right? This is where I think when we can remember with our higher level thinking skills, like, okay, brain development, this is not them intentionally misinterpreting me. This is their brain, without them even knowing this is happening, their brain is overvaluing any small cues to possible negative emotion. So they're going to misread my tone, my facial expression, and also sometimes they're going to pick up on maybe even subtle nonverbal cues that I'm not aware I have, because maybe actually I am a little bit already kind of annoyed because, they left a mess this morning, they were rude in the car. I might already be primed to be a little bit irritable, even if I'm really working hard to control my
Right,
tone
right.
and to control my facial expressions and not to belie what I'm
Controlled
really feeling.
regulation.
And so teens are really actually perceptive, even if they can't articulate that. They might not be able to tell you, yeah, body language. They pick up on all of that, even if they can't tell you that that's what they see.
And one of the reasons that they pick up on that so expertly is because they are experts in the limbic system, amygdala part of the brain, which, you know, right brain, limbic system, that part is nonverbal. It's all body language based. And so it's oftentimes why when we are communicating with our teen in order to bring logic and reason to a situation, there's actually no absorption. It's because they're probably in a state of their own brain that is non-receptive to language. And so body language is a great source of being able to connect with them in the brain part that they are in at that moment.
And I'm going to kind of jump ahead to the interpersonal neurobiology piece again for just a minute, because this is so hard to do. So please know, like, we mess this up with our kids all the time, but it's just something that we have to kind of keep going back to, which is it's easy to react to their intense emotion, particularly when it's directed at you, particularly when it feels like out of nowhere or inconsistent with your experience. It's hard not to have an emotional response to that. And so part of our job is to kind of do what we need to do to slow ourselves down, tend to our own nervous system, which is often really activated in those exchanges with our kids. Like, we also go into more of that reptilian brain where we're having a fight, flight, or freeze response based on our own experiences, right? So some of it's not even about what's happening in the moment for us. It's also about how are we parented? What was our adolescence like? All that's showing up in the moment. And that's like a whole lot to kind of hold in mind every time you have to have an interaction with your teen. So good news is you really only have to like get it right like 20% of the time.
Yep.
And the rest of the time you can mess it up and just be willing to go back and look at it and even acknowledge like, that was really hard for me. What just happened there? And I really got upset, or I really got angry with you. And I needed to take some time to settle my own nervous system, to take some deep breaths, where we can do a lot of great modeling for them just by how we're responding to their emotionality.
Yeah. And as Blake was saying before about them into a face that we're sincerely like not giving, that also provides a moment sometimes in which you can try and find more attunement with your child. Like, you trying to get it right, like sort of reflecting to them, like, I know that you're seeing that I'm really irritated, and I don't want that to be the face that I'm giving to you right now. I want you to see how much I care about this situation. So, like, can we talk about that too? And is there something that you like need from me right now in order to help you feel that connection that I want you to have? And, probably 90% of the time you might get like a little snarky response or something back that causes another little jab, but it's that 10% of the time in which there's that turnaround really has a giant impact on your relationship, on their brain. And that's the sort of the key of like why we keep trying at this stuff, why the repair is needed, because that sort of stuff has such significant impact.
And this links back to, whatever your anchor is, that thing that you really want for your teen. It's easy to get sidetracked by, wanting to correct them for the emotional expression that's inappropriate, for being rude to you when they're in a heightened emotional state, that we want to feel respected by them. And we kind of get caught up then in punishing the expression of the emotion, as opposed to like pausing and getting back into a more regulated state ourselves so that we can figure out like what is actually going on here. Because and oftentimes has nothing to do with whatever the topic is at hand. It's probably about 15 other things that we're never going to get to because we end up focusing on the wrong piece. And so it helps to go back to like, okay, if I really want them to get some learning and growth out of this opportunity, then I might need to stop talking for a minute here, because I'm going down the path of punishment and criticism that's just going to shut them down. It's not actually going to open them up to connection or reflection.
Absolutely. And I feel like this puts us in a good place. Do you mind if I
No.
jump ahead
Yeah,
to curious to know, like, what are some of the challenges and the hurdles that get in the way of you connecting with your team? And you can think practical hurdles, like we actually just never see each other. Because I think that's realistic. We can even think about personal hurdles on your part, on their part. So big or small, curious to know, like, what happens when you're trying to connect with your team.
And feel free to share, of course, or to just keep it in your own awareness. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Amen.
leftovers.
Amen to that.
That's a good one.
Being tired, that's a huge thing. And if you look at any like quick Google search about the teen brain, like you're sure to get the sleep is so important. And
they're not getting enough of it.
Hard to come by. We're in a fast-paced world. There's a lot. It's really hard to know what is like sort of okay to cut in order to sort of like maybe make up on some time, get a little extra sleep. After work, it's so hard to focus on teen chatter. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Making sense of like what's coming out of their mind. I love this. This is really helpful too. Because when we identify couple of the areas that are, particular like sensitive time
vulnerabilities.
Zones, that's the word. Vulnerabilities. It can help us get oriented to like what's the extra support that we might need in this sensitive time zone.
Our vulnerabilities and theirs. It's so important for us to be aware of the times when we're more likely to be tired, overworked, stressed out, distracted, which during the work and school week is most of us most of the time. And it's also most of our teens. And so none of us are really at our best during the times when we're most likely to be together, especially when you think about like the car rides and, the early mornings when everybody's rushed. And so our awareness of those vulnerabilities can also cue us into like, when is it really important for me to just let this go and not attempt to connect or repair or teach or educate? And when can I come back to it at a time when each of us is in a little bit less vulnerable state? And there's no perfect time. There's no ideal, like free of all stress time for you and your team to connect, but we can at least sometimes identify like slightly more optimal moments when we can try to do some of this like super heavy lifting parenting work.
That's a good term. I love that, heavy lifting parenting. It actually got me thinking, and I see that we're a room of many women, and it's probably most of us can remember the witching hour of young baby toddlerhood. I'm not sure if that ever goes away with our kiddos. There's something around like this, like 5 to 7, or maybe in teen years it shifts to like, the 8 to 10. Yeah. But there's that sensitive time, and going back and thinking for yourself about like what was really important to me right then, right? It was like, what can I do to create a quiet environment? What can I do to help myself and my family slow down? What can we do to eliminate any unnecessary extras that might be absorbing the little energy that we have left?
Mm-hmm. We've talked a bunch about, kind of what interpersonal neurobiology is about and how our brains and bodies are communicating nonverbally. I think Oh, that's great. Yes. Paige, you've got all sorts of wonderful tidbits here. I love it. I want to talk for just a second about this concept of self-soothing, because I think it's really important. Because one of the things I think most of us want for our kids when they're adults is for them, even when they're younger, we want them to be able to what we call self-soothe, which is like calm themselves down when they need to. But what we kind of forget is, like, it's easier with toddlers. We can remember, like, a toddler can't do that. All right, they need us to help them.
Yeah,
They
they're
need our
young.
co-regulation. But teenagers actually really need that too. They still don't have really self-regulation is only learned through relationships, through the ability to co-regulate with another person, particularly with a trusted adult who is able to regulate their own emotions. Again, not stay calm all the time. This is not about being the calm and peaceful parent 100% of the time, but somebody who's aware of and at least able to acknowledge their emotional state is a really great way for teens to learn how to modulate their own emotional state. And so that's, I think, one of these cornerstones that we keep coming back to when we think about like how to really nurture the parent and teen relationship. And okay, so we've only got about 15 minutes. I know we wanted to save a little bit of time for some questions. Did you want to say anything more about the last piece on parent relationships?
I think we could skip through some of that stuff. There's this great study, and it shows that around 70 to like 85% of teens, they feel positively about their mom, they feel positively about their father, parent figures, and they also want to spend time with their family and parents. I think sometimes that perception goes out the door, and it feels like we've lost connection, they don't like me the majority of the time. I just feel like that's like research data that's so helpful to hang on to in hard moments.
So I think we have, let's get maybe a last reflection. Do you want to go through a couple of things on listening and communicating?
For sure.
Okay, jump into those.
We saw that there's some questions ahead of time about like how do I really like communicate with my teen? How do I get them to listen? Clearly here, it's really hard to listen to teen chatter, that stuff too. Communication it's really hard. And we have some suggestions and some sort of reframes, as Blake was saying about regulation, like that is an important key component to good communication is noticing how is my body reacting to what's coming in. And if my body is having a reaction where my nervous system feels like frazzled or activated, what is it that I can do in this moment to help me regulate? And regulation is like, it's an ongoing process. It's not like a one-time bam thing, you're done. Like, okay, good, I've done my regulation, I'm ready to head out the door for the day. It's an ongoing, internal experience of checking in with yourself and, kind of tuning in. And so when we go into conversations with teens, if you're heading into that direction, that's like the first step, is kind of tune in, and do I have any alarm bells going off that are going to thwart the conversation, that are sort of kind of come in and be the gremlins of this conversation?
So we want to avoid jumping to conclusions with our teens. We want to try to stay out of the storytelling where we're going to the place of, if I don't get this fixed, it's going to be, they're going to be ruined, right? They're not going to have a future. We tend to go to our worst case scenarios when we're wanting to like problem solve with teens. And so trying to step out of that catastrophizing, stay grounded in what's most important, which oftentimes isn't actually whatever the actual problem is in that moment. It's like, okay, can I get back to a place of connection? That oftentimes trumps whatever problem we want to solve, because it's from that place of connection that we're back at being able to collaboratively problem solve, as opposed to what often ends up becoming a power struggle or a source of conflict.
And getting out of the place of needing to problem solve everything and intervene with everything.
I like this point that you wrote down here.
What did I say?
Empathize, but don't overdo it. So, I want to be clear, like when we talk about being empathic and understanding of your teen's emotionality, it also is not about giving them a pass or carte blanche to speak to you or anybody else any way they want, to not have any sort of boundaries or consequences. It's not about that. So we don't want to overemphasize our connection to their emotions. We don't want to take on their emotions. We want to have some boundaries within ourselves so that we're not consumed by their emotions. And also that we aren't like laying it on too thick, like, oh my gosh, that sounds so hard, where they can tell we're kind of faking it. We don't really believe it, but we're just like kind of playing up to their good side. And so we kind of just want to stay as neutral as we can and give them more room to step in and do some of the talking. And again, that helps them practice. Like, we're not just filling in all the blanks for them. We're giving them some room to tell us about their experience, whether it's of what's happening between us or of some problem out there that we're working at solving.
I'd like to also talk about emotional guessing, that is something that we can do with our child, especially in circumstances when, like we're kind of searching, we're like, I just like don't know what's going on with my teen. It's hard to interpret the situation. Teens these days are going through things that it's like really hard to relate to. So finding some empathy and like that connection is quite difficult to do. This is another sort of brain-based approach as well. It's like when we're connecting with the emotions, we're helping to cultivate that sense of self-awareness, helping them to like think somewhat critically. It also is sort of a key to soothing and taming some of the bigger emotions. So like an emotional guessing game, it wouldn't be like, and are you feeling this? And are you feeling this? It'd be more like just finding a place of curiosity of like I wonder if you're like really feeling frustrated about that situation, or like, gosh, that may have been a little scary for you. And then maybe your child comes back with like, yeah, that's right. There's that sense of like resonance, that sense of like, relief, when you talk to your best friend and they're like, that's so infuriating. And then you're like, that's so infuriating. And there's this cathartic release. It's kind of the thing that we're looking for. Sometimes though, our emotional guessing is wrong, and that's totally okay too, because that gives your teen an opportunity to sort of put you in the right place and come to a correction, a place where that they can be like, no, I wasn't frustrated. I was enraged by it, and getting it right.
Okay. So with the last few minutes, I want to open it up to anybody that wants to either come on screen and talk about either something that this evoked for you, more questions, comments that you have about some of what we've talked about. If there are things that this got you thinking about that you want to make sure you leave here knowing more about or thinking more about, we're really open. So would anybody like to jump in?
I'm going to pause the recording. So if anyone wants to talk, you're not going to be recorded for all posterity.